Welcome to the Left of Str8 Show, where we talk entertainment, music, books, foodies, and more each week with special guest interviews of interest to the LGBTQ community and our straight allies. Direct from the entertainment capital of Northeast Ohio. Your host, Scott Fullerton, chats with some of your favorite entertainers, celebrities, newsmakers, and behind-the-scenes people across the country and around the world who make it all happen. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and let's start talking.
Alrighty, guys, let's get into my next interview. I have the pleasure today of bringing back to the Left of Str8 Show Mr. Fred Karger, who made history as the first openly gay man to run for the presidency. Our last interview, we discussed his historic run, pre-Pete Buttigieg even, and his advocacy on behalf of our LGBT community before and since. I'm excited to have him back as he has recently published another memoir, World's Greatest Crasher, that tells the tales of his crashing such events as the Oscars, the Met Gala, the Vanity Fair Party, political events, and more. The book has been described as a real-life cross between the movies Catch Me If You Can and Wedding Crashers, and in 2015, Fred was named the world's greatest crasher by the Canadian lifestyle and celebrity website The Richest. Although having made a name for himself now in politics and activism, he still regularly gets invited to prestigious events, but it's fun to do a crash every once in a while. Well, we'll talk about that and everything else. Please welcome back to the show, Mr. Fred Karger. Fred, how you doing, sir?
Great, Scott. Thanks very much for having me back on.
I appreciate you taking the time to come back on. I'm excited. I haven't had a chance to read the book yet because we just kind of set this up the other day. But I am looking forward to it because I am a bit of a party crasher myself. So we'll have to compare a couple of stories here. But congratulations on the new memoir.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's not just crashing escapades. It's really kind of a metaphor for how to, forge ahead in life. And you've got to push the envelope a lot, as I've done in my activism and my campaign and everything else. So I do have a lot of great tales and photos in the book. You don't have to read the book. You can just look at the 20 pages of photos and pretty much check it off.
I'm seeing some of the photos, definitely a who's who, very impressive at all. I want to get into the book in a second, but because we've had you on before, we talked about politics, and with everything that's happening these days, let's take a quick brush into it. I just can't believe how quick things have turned around in the Republican Party here for our LGBT community. Are you surprised at the speed of everything's changing with DeSantis and these book bannings and Tennessee laws?
No, not with that stuff, but I am surprised with the vote on the Respect for Marriage Act last year, and I was thrilled to be at the signing of that at the White House. President Biden and everyone else in the administration, celebrities, everybody. But, don't forget, as terrible as the Republicans are, and particularly guys like DeSantis, who are using us to further their political careers, but 43 House Republicans voted for that to ensure same-sex marriage into the law of the land, and 4 of whom were Republican members of the House from Utah. The 4 Mormon House members voted. That was our first tip-off. And then in the Senate, and I know there's some activists who think that's terrible that only 12 Republicans voted for the Respect for Marriage Act, but 12 did. We only needed 10 to get through the filibuster to make it law, but 12 did it, including Romney, who, of course, I ran against in 2012, and he was one of the first to sign the National Organization for Marriage's Respect for Marriage constitutional amendment petition that ensured that the same-sex marriage would be banned in the Constitution. So talk about a 180. That's the good news. And yes, we're going to continue to get bashed, but then there's some bright hopes in there, some reversals of things that give me a little bit of encouragement. But yeah, the Republican Party, thanks primarily to Trump, has really gone down the toilet.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of culture wars happening, and just things have moved. So, I mean, I was naive, I guess, that I thought in my lifetime things were just going to keep going up and up better because the younger generation was so accepting and the older people were kind of dying out. But then you have
Yeah.
DeSantis, who's pretty young, and he's starting it up all over again. So it's
Yeah.
a little crazy as far as I'm concerned there.
Well, I did something. I organized with the Log Cabin Republican chair and also Megan McCain. We were all invited to speak at Washington University in 2015, and we did what was called the St. Louis Resolution, all signed there, and that was to encourage the Republicans seeking the presidential nomination, which of course included Trump and others, not to do the LGBTQ bashing that had happened 4 years earlier. And that's what I referenced in this conversation. The National Organization for Marriage had its marriage pledge that all candidates must sign if they're considered, serious Republican candidates, to ensure that the same-sex marriage was banned in the Constitution. And I don't know, 6 or 8 of them signed it. Well, we never had that dialogue in 2016. Now, of course, it's pick on trans season, particularly in Florida, and it's just despicable. But people are using that to get ahead. But the overall tenor has lessened within, many of the Republican Party members. But, so many of the rational people were driven out of the Republican Party by Trump that those voices for civil rights are no longer at the forefront.
Very true. Just on a personal thing, I mean, your activism started back in one of my favorite places, the Boom Boom Room in Laguna Beach, that I used to go to quite a bit when it was a thing and I lived in California. But you sold your beach house. I was so disappointed. Are you missing it yet?
No, not sold, actually. Just pulled off the market.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I still have it. I'm still Laguna Beach. Just happened last week. They just been very quiet. When I listed it in December, I got a bunch of offers, but I wanted to hold out. And I was just also a little hesitant at the time. I was kind of vacillating. So I'm going to keep it at least for another 90 days and maybe enjoy the summer there. So come back and visit.
There you go. I'll have to come visit when I come out in June. That would be fun. That was
no more Boom Boom Room, but the space is still empty. 18 years later, it closed, and it's still available. So very sad that they shut it down.
I love Laguna Beach. My mom was a huge Balboa Beach person when she was a kid. She used to go to Balboa Beach all the time and knew a couple movie stars and stuff out there she would go to. And I just love that area out there. I was more Huntington Beach until I got a little older and more sophisticated.
Right. Gotta go south a little more.
All right, well, let's jump into the interview here and have some fun. I got to talk party crashing. First, congratulations on the book. I mean, I remember when I was doing research for the first time you were on the show, you'd been talking about this way back in 2011, 2012, possibly coming out with a book on all your exploits. And now it's here. How exciting is it to get this done? And how much have you been add to it since 2012? Goodness.
Yeah, plenty of additions. But yeah, I it's a whole lifelong of crashing I've done. But I started to write it right after I retired in 2004 because, of course, what do you do when you retire? You write a book. And I thought that'd be a fun one. And I had one elusive crash, which was the most popular, toughest to get into party, the Vanity Fair Party. And so I devised a way to do that using this fake Oscar, which I keep on my bookshelf, which looks a lot like the real McCoy. And I took it and 4 other people into the Oscar party, the Vanity Fair Party. Got in easily by saying that I had won an Oscar that evening for visual effects for King Kong. And that was then, once I had that done, I was going to write the book. And it was an incredible party. Everybody came up to me, what'd you win for? Want to hold the Oscar? And it went to my head. By the end of the evening, I can see what happens.
Well, you were relatively young too. You were like 22 to 24 years old when this started, and you grew up in Chicago area. Talk about what got you interested in the first place.
Yeah, well, I started at a young age, and I used to go into the city of Chicago from the suburbs on high school dates and with friends, and we'd just go usually to the Hilton Hotel, which always had plethora of events happening, and we'd sneak into those, the interesting ones. We'd go sit down at dinners when there are empty seats, and it just kind of was a fun thing to do. People loved to go on my exploits, and I taught a lot of people the art of crashing. Some were more natural to it than others, but we always had a fun time, and really enjoyed those experiences because it's a challenge, and it's just like life. And of course, I grew up as this gay kid, very, very disturbed and bothered by my sexuality and being different, and I used different outlets to try and excel. And I was not a good student, and I was got in trouble a lot. So this was kind of an outlet where I could shine. Of course, I realized that much later. And then 2015, being named the world's greatest crasher, because I'd gotten a lot of news coverage on my exploits from Atlantic Magazine and the Washington Post, and probably 15 or 20 major news organizations. So when the Richest was compiling its list, top 15 most notorious crashers, I was number one based on all these interviews I'd done. So they never even talked to me, but I'm, of course, eternally grateful. Because again, growing up as this kid with zero self-esteem because I was gay, I never thought I'd amount to much, but I certainly never thought I'd be named the world's greatest in anything. Not exactly a Nobel Prize, but it's something.
Well, it does take confidence to kind of do that and to get yourself involved. And it kind of, you're almost taking on a persona of somebody to get into the event, depending on what it is. And I think you've even said that before, and I've talked about it before, where as a gay kid growing up and being closeted, you take on a lot of personas trying to convince people who you are. So it might have been a little bit of a heads up that way. Plus, you wanted to be an actor, you found out later. So I'm sure those skills kind of came in handy as well.
Well, and I was a lousy actor, but I was very good at improv. And I used to take improv classes at Second City and through Howard Storm, a big director. Anyway, and that's where I would shine. And of course, that's the skill you need in crashing. So when you get stopped going in, you got to come up with a great story. Or when you're sitting next to somebody at a dinner, how do you explain what you're doing at the American Lung Association award gala or something? So anyway, it's good for your skills. And just like you said, Scott, being gay, when your mother would ask, what did you do this weekend? Or your friends, where'd you go last night? You had to be quick on your feet and come up with a lie before I was able to come out to the world and to my circle of friends and coworkers and neighbors and everything. And so that was part of my training, but I certainly don't advocate that or recommend it, which is why I got into the activism business, because I didn't want other LGBTQ kids, adults to go through what I went through.
Right. Now that's important. I mean, it's tough to do the coming out process, but we always find out how much worth it is in the end. So it's really when we talk about it getting better and we talk about the importance of coming out, it really comes from a place of love. It's scary as hell, but it comes from a place of acceptance in yourself that lets you accept yourself in so many other parts of your life, right?
And risk, there's a huge amount of risk, less now, but I had always had a debate. If I come out to my parents, are they going to throw me out of the house? Are my friends going to not be my friends anymore? Am I going to get fired from work? Am I going to lose clients? There are just so many factors, and you convince yourself that you're just better off by just staying on the DL and faking that you're straight, taking women, as I used to do, to events, family events, work events all the time, which is kind of fun, but it's very demeaning. It's very sad to have to do to live that lie. And I was in an 11-year relationship from 1979 to 1990. Jeff Walbridge, we lived together. We had the dog. It was what I thought would be forever. Wonderful partner. I would be proud to show, take anywhere, but I never could take to a work function like everybody else did with their significant others. I could never take them to a family event. Of the 11 years we were together, we never spent one Christmas. I would have to go to Chicago. He'd be with his family, have to go to pay phone booths to call him on the sly. I didn't want a chance take call, from my parents' house. So, it's just a terrible, terrible existence. And I had it a lot better than most, but I can really relate to what people go through and what we've all gone through. And so and when you have these politicians and other activists, bashing the LGBTQ community, especially our trans brothers and sisters. It's so distressing to see. And, I'm a karma believer, Scott. So, these people who have really used us as bait to get ahead, starting in California in the 70s, which is when I first got involved, fighting John Briggs and the Prop 6, banning all gay teachers in the state and those types of things. Those people have all their lives have all completely been destroyed, not by outside forces, because these are, people who have a lot of faults and issues. Some of whom, of course, we found are closeted gays who have been the loudest. But most of those people are very damaged, and their lives have gone to hell or had gone to hell before they passed away. And so that's kind of my my satisfaction. The karma thing is very real, and you want to go up against our community. There's not just a price to pay from activists like me and you and others, but it's just inside you. And so it's great to see Anita Bryant career completely destroyed, her family life completely destroyed, because she decided to take on this battle and do a lot of damage and cause a lot of pain and death. So retribution, firm believer, eye for an eye.
Exactly. Well, talk about your first major crash. Was that the Oscars? Was that the first major event you went to? And we just had Oscar week a little while back here. Was that your first main event you tried, or what? Did you try any bigger events before that?
I guess in high school or college, actually, there was this big gala. My parents attended actually that one year called the Crystal Ball, and a fraternity brother, a good friend, and I went to the Hilton Hotel again, where I knew the back door and the kitchen and all the side entrances very well. And we went to the uniform room and got waiters' uniforms. And I don't know what we did with our clothes. We can't remember. But anyway, we walked into this very grand black tie gala, annual gala, and surprised a lot of people. So that was kind of the first time I really took it up there. But the Academy Awards was at a whole new level. And not only did people crash the Academy Awards, maybe somehow they get into the building, but of course, no one has ever appeared on stage 2 consecutive years like I did. And the first was this highly acclaimed year, probably the most famous moment in Oscar history, when Charlie Chaplin was given an honorary Oscar. And it's the only time they've ever ended the Oscars with an honorary Oscar as opposed to the Best Picture, like we saw a few weeks ago. That's always the close of the show. But Chaplin, who'd been exiled because he was a communist sympathizer, allegedly, hadn't been in the U.S. in 20 years. So this was his big homecoming. And I was standing on the stage as this 4 stories of seating of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion rose to its feet, screaming for full 3 minutes. And of course, I was on the stage. So somehow, again, that gets into your head. It's like, is this for me? Not really.
Right.
It just gives you a huge rush. And then that was particularly funny because we were all positioned on the stage and I had the proper credentials to be there. They asked for Academy Award winners and presenters to go on stage for this closing. It was very spontaneous because, of course, they didn't know who the winners were going to be. They knew the presenters, but it was unrehearsed and we were all standing on risers. And then everybody started to go down to greet Chaplin. And people started pairing off. And this is all on my website, fredkarger.com. You can see these actual photos from 1972. And so Joe Namath and Raquel Welch were behind us, and they just kind of grabbed each other's arms. And then Anne Margaret was standing in front of me, and she starts looking around so she could grab someone's arm. And I was the closest man, so she grabbed my arm. Turns out we'd, gone to the same high school, which I was aware of. She was not. And I told her that. So we had this wonderful moment and I pushed us right down. So we were right in easy access to Chaplin to shake his hand. And so it was a very fun, exciting moment. And then when I went to the after party, this personal manager by the name of Alan Carr, who was quite well known as was the biggest manager at the time and threw these big parties. He had met me at a party a few nights earlier. I'd crashed. And he said, okay. Anne Margaret was his client, his biggest client. So he goes, you got to fill me in. You got to come to California. I want to write a movie. This is unbelievable. How did you do this? So, he had seen me 2 nights earlier crashing a very fancy pre-Oscar party. And then 2 nights later sees me on stage with his client. So that kind of got me to California, and got me into this acting world. And 50 years ago this month, Scott, I moved here. So I was going
That's
to give it a try for a year or
amazing.
two. I stuck around.
That's so cool. I told you I'm kind of a kindred spirit as far as I love to party crash myself, but I do it more for the entertainment value just because I like to hobnob and see people. The excitement doesn't get me. I'm scared to death the entire time. But back in my day living in LA, I had a good friend that was in charge of all the seat fillers, they have in all the
Oh,
award shows. So I would seat fill for the Academy
really?
Awards and the Comedy Awards and Grammys and things like that. But the best I ever got was I got into the Governor's Ball a couple of times where I really shouldn't have. But you actually made it to the Vanity Fair Party. Talk about how that came about and the thrillingness of being inside the most popular party of the season.
That was my last act before I was going to write this book. When I first retired, was to go to the Vanity Fair Party by hook or by crook, because was the hottest party in the world. Still is, not quite what it was. This was 2006, the Brokeback Mountain year. But I had always wondered, because I bought an Oscar, a fake Oscar, at a trophy store in LA. I was there for picking up some award or something for a client. And I saw the Oscar, and the guy said, "Oh yeah, it's fitted at the exact same place in Rockford, Illinois, where they make the real Oscars, and it's just tweaked a little bit, but
Right?
it's authentic." So I used to have it at Oscar parties. I also thought, wow, could I get into the Vanity Fair Party brandishing that? So I stayed home. I had a ballot in front of me. I watched it by myself. I wanted to see whose identity I was going to assume. And it was a guy named Richard Taylor, glasses, gray hair, won for one of like the team, 4 people won for King Kong visual effects. So I go and put my tuxedo on, tying my tie. It was kind of like a movie. I put the Oscar in a paper bag because you can't walk around the streets with an Oscar. And then when I met these 4 kids on the street, we put our heads together, and before I knew it, we were in the middle of the street. The sheriffs were coming over, and "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I won this Oscar for King Kong. I was told I'd come to the Vanity Fair Party. Wait right here." And so we're waiting, and I'm again with these 4 kids, these 3 girls, one guy I just met on the street, all dressed up, and they
Oh my
they
God.
say came to us and said, "You're in." And we walked up to this clipboard and person and said name and all that, and how many with you, and I 1, 2, 3, 4, and bam, we're in. And all the paparazzi lined on bleachers at the front of what was then Morton's restaurant were, I think, just dumbfounded. I had a girl on each arm, and then I had this couple behind me. So I looked like, most, celebrities even don't show up with that big of an entourage. So we got in. My friend Paul Nelson, who's a personal manager, sees me, the first person I saw it. He said, "Oh my God, you got in. I can't believe it." And then his client, Brittany Murphy, very cute actress who had passed
Yeah,
away, but she was at her peak, and he was her date that night anyway. And she goes, "Oh my God, is this Fred?" I didn't know that
that's
he had even
hilarious.
alerted her. And he said, "Yes." And she goes, "Oh my God, you are kick-ass. I never use that term, but you are kick-ass." So I got a great compliment from Brittany Murphy, and then spent the entire evening getting accolades from everybody. "What'd you win for? Can I hold your Oscar? Can I have your picture taken? My picture taken with you?" Yeah, all this stuff. And again, yeah, it went to my head. And so I checked that box off. So I also, the funny part of that was, you can't really take pictures at a party like that. And this is 2006, no cell phones. So I had a camera,
Right.
but you couldn't really go around like today. And I'm sure even, the Vanity Fair Party is still off limits. But I saw one, I wanted to take a picture with Catherine Keener. She had been nominated for Best Supporting Actress that year for Truman. And so, or Capote, whatever the movie was. So anyway, so I'm talking to her, and I said, "Hey, can I get a picture?" "Sure." So I tucked the Oscar under my arm, reach for my camera. The Oscar falls to the floor. This little group screams like somebody dropped, a very expensive vase or an infant or something. And I scooped it
Right.
up and said, "They make these things well." And everybody left except one woman. And she said, "This is great." She said, "Do you mind if I use this in my story?" And I said, "Well, who are you writing for?" And she said, "The Los Angeles Times." So I said, "I got a better story for you." So, of course, in the big recap in the LA Times, when people used to read the newspaper every day, it said, like halfway in the story, it said, "Speaking of inappropriate," and then there's a whole little funny paragraph about my crash and almost dropping my fake Oscar on Catherine Keener's foot. So I like
That's
to document
amazing.
everything, whether by photo or news story or something, because a lot of crashers like to claim a lot of things, but I have absolute proof of everything in my book.
Now, didn't I read that actually Jake Gyllenhaal kind of called you out on the Oscar?
Yeah. So I'd been there, I don't know how many hours, 2 a.m. I was exhausted. Yeah, the stress, like is, you're very nervous. I all kind of looking over my shoulder the whole time. But anyway, I had to get a Jake Gyllenhaal picture. And that guy had lost, also supporting actor, win that night for Brokeback. And so he was not in a great mood, but he had like 5 girls around him at all times. But I could not leave the party without a Jake Gyllenhaal picture. I would never be able to show my face to my friends. So anyway, I went in, interrupted him, and he wasn't happy about it. And it's a great picture. His tie's loose, and you could tell he's not too thrilled. But as the picture is being taken, he goes, "That's not real, is it?" He was the only one to call me out on it. And at that point, I was tired and ready to leave. So I said, "Nope." And I just walked away. But everybody else, I had propositions. I had all kinds of interesting
That's amazing.
when you walk in there with an Oscar, albeit fake.
I love that. I never had the courage to go for that. I don't think I lived there when Elton John started his foundation one, so I don't even think that was a possibility when I was still living in LA. It's been like 25 years I've been back here now, so I don't remember when Elton John started his foundation, but that's one I would love to go to now, of course, if you were crashing, that would be the one to crash, I
I
think.
crashed that a couple times, not in my book,
Nice.
but I did it one year because I knew a bunch of people who were working the party. They have 200 servers, mostly men. Then I knew the catering company. It was a restaurant, if you remember, Mark's on La Cienega. But
Hmm.
Chris and Wayne were the caterers of that always. And so I found out what the attire was. So I wore a black shirt, black slacks, show up a little late, didn't have a credential or anything, but I walked up to Wayne, who kind of knew me, and said, "Yeah, I'm here to work." And he goes, "Well, I don't know if we have anything for you." So he got his partner on the walkie-talkie then and said, "Yeah, just give him a credential." So I went and I was very nervous at this thing. Plus, I knew certain people. So I ended up going into this line where they were waiting, where you would pass hors d'oeuvres. So there's a whole line of servers there, and they give you a platter of hors d'oeuvres. So I was very professional. I waited tables. I said, what are the ingredients? What do I do? Anyway, off I went, past one thing of hors d'oeuvres. Then they said, "Okay, important meeting for everybody about the table service and everything." So all 200 of us, or 201, are in this training thing. And I'm going, it was so complicated because each waiter had a table or 2 waiters. Anyway, and it was all this special.
Right.
And I said, "Okay, I'm not doing that." So during the dinner, because it's a viewing party, cocktails, then viewing party of the Oscars, then an after party. A lot of new people come. But I went out to one of the bars. They had 15 bars, only 2 of which were open. So I opened the 3rd bar and I stood there until people started coming out of the dinner, like Paris Hilton and her then fiance, the Greek shipping magnate, Paris somebody. And I had David LaChapelle and Pamela Anderson, and they were all, I think, maybe doing drugs. So they were not eating. So they just hung out at my bar. I remember what they drank, and were chit-chatting. David LaChapelle, the photographer, or Chappelle, wanted to borrow my cell phone because he had left something in his car. And so I lent him that. And he said, "Are you sure? Can I give you money?" I said, No. Free weekends or whatever. The old switcheroo where I took my credential, borrowed a second credential from a waiter I knew, went across the street to Cafe de Toile, changed into my tuxedo, and then using the credential and with my friend Leaf, we both walked back into the party as guests. I ran into a bunch of people I knew, one of whom said, "I was wondering why I saw you as a waiter earlier. Is everything okay?" I was a little older to be a waiter at this thing. Everybody else in their 20s, and I'm in my 50s. So it worked out pretty well, though. Forget what
Well,
it
let's
is.
talk about a couple things in the book. Briefly, talk to me a second about Frank Sinatra's penthouse party and being in Elvis's dressing room.
Not necessarily in that order. Well,
Exactly.
I don't know. Elvis, it was just So I'd caught on when you go to Vegas, which I'd done, and you go see a show. At the end of the show, everyone leaves, but all is, I don't know, a dozen people kind of hang out because they have invites to go back to the dressing room. And most stars who perform in Vegas, they see their friends after the show, some before, but usually after. And so it was an Elvis thing, which I couldn't afford to buy a ticket to, but I was in Vegas, so I knew the drill. So I went in there, stood in there, waited. Everybody collected off to the left of the stage. And it was people like Larry Storch, who was on a show, F Troop, and his wife,
Right. Sure.
and Marty Allen, who was a funny comedian with all this crazy hair, and his wife, Frenchie Allen. They were always in the papers for going to events, and a couple other random people. Anyway, they just, and me, and I was the ninth or whatever. And then we just get escorted back into Elvis's dressing room. And all of a sudden we're waiting and everyone's very nervous. I'm nervous for another reason, but the king is about ready to come. Out he comes, as wired and hyper, he just got off the stage. But I'm sure on plenty of substances. Anyway, he greets everybody, looked great. He said, "Hey, anybody want to go on a tour of the dressing room?" So I'm thinking, I don't know, how do I miss that? I said, I don't want to push it. And so the men basically stayed behind. So I'm hanging out with Marty Allen, Larry Storch. And like 10 or 15 minutes later, all the women came back brandishing like rings and bracelets. Look what Elvis gave me. Look what Elvis gave me. And I'm going, oh, shit, I should have.
Oh, my goodness.
Should have gone on there. So that was a pretty incredible time. And then Frank Sinatra, this right when I'd moved to LA and I had my new partners in crime, one of whom, Franny, was the Playmate of the Month for Playboy magazine. Beautiful. And my friend John Porterfield, we were crashing the American Film Institute tribute to James Cagney, which was the second AFI tribute. In those days, that AFI thing was just Star Central. And we're walking in, and who do we see but Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw, who was kind of the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie of the time. I mean, just this, major power couple, both giant stars. And I go, let's go. And we followed them. We get in the elevator because I knew they were going somewhere other than the main reception. And up we go to the penthouse and into the Frank Sinatra. He was the chairman of that AFI event, so he was hosting the pre-party. But as John Porterfield said, who helped me on the book and I'm still good friends with, we're the only people he didn't recognize. But I took the picture at the very end of the party, right when the dinner was about to start, of Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra, and John Wayne. The three biggest stars at the time were talking. And those days he had a flash. My flash went off and I was quickly escorted out of the party. And it's a terrible picture, but you definitely can make out that those were the three. And I knew I was going to be leaving anyway, but we managed to sit at, I ended up sitting with, forget his first name, Keyes, who was the director of the television broadcast. I sat next to his wife. I always like to sit at a close table. And she said, "Oh no, just stay here, because he's going to be working the whole night." So I was sitting next to the director's wife, and it was quite an evening.
That is absolutely crazy. Bring me over to the Met Ball. I mean, from what I've heard about the Met Ball, there's like 18 layers of security you have to go through and everything. And supposedly now you make me 3 degrees of separation away from Ryan Reynolds, which I'm very excited about. But give me a Met Ball story.
So I did it twice. I'd always wanted to try to get in because, again, a very elusive event. And, a lot of people like that Vanity Fair Party. I mean, they turn away dozens of potential crashers. I'd met one earlier who had tried. So the Met Gala, similarly. So I dressed in my tux. I took an Uber XL or whatever. So they looked like, big SUV. I pulled up and they start checking tickets, but I kind of walked across the street to come up with my strategy, which I didn't have one. And I see like 3 dressed up people walking to the Met, which is on the other side of Fifth Avenue. So, normally people show up in some kind of vehicle, but so I thought, oh, this might work. So anyway, I glommed onto them and got in the first checkpoint, actually got thrown out of the first checkpoint because I was trying to figure out how to get to the second. And somebody asked for my ticket. I said, I'm waiting for my wife. And well, you need to wait out there. So I one step back. But anyway, then I just kept proceeding through the different checkpoints. There's a line, this is in 2017, and I was standing behind Andrew Rannells from Book of Mormon, who
Oh
had
yeah, of course.
two
Broadway.
girls as dates. I was so nervous, and there's an on deck where everybody waits in line before the women mostly ascend this grand staircase there. And so I just stood there, and all of a sudden he went up with the two women, and then the woman ahead of me was standing by herself in the middle of the staircase posing for pictures. The men stand off to the left, which is what I did. No idea who this woman is. I have pictures of her. I love to find out her identity. She probably wouldn't want to know who I was. But anyway, so I saw her, and I just moved in and I escorted her up the rest of the grand staircase. 2 more checkpoints up there, but I was with her on one, and one I just walked through. And then we're in the receiving line with, you'd like this too, Tom Brady. And Anna Wintour was the first one, and she supposedly knows every name and every person. So I thought, I'm going to get busted for sure. I was very quick with her, gorgeous, whatever I said, moved right on. And by the time I got to Tom Brady, who he and his wife were co-chairs, I was feeling a little more confident. And I said, hey, what do you do as co-chair of this thing? He goes, not really. My wife did it all. I said, well, you're tall. Did you put all those roses up there? There's like 3 stories of roses on a wall. So he laughed. And then I got into the party and into the dinner, which didn't get to sit, but it was still fun. And then I went this last year too, not really to even go to the Met Gala, but to find out about the after parties, because those I discovered are way more fun than the Met Gala. But I ended up at the Met Gala. I did find out about the after party after asking 50 people. They're top secret, but this one woman spilled the beans, and she said, well, there's one Meta party or something on 80th, but then there's the Tom Ford party at the Carlisle. So it's like, that's where I want to be. And this was white tie and tails, Scott. It was the Gilded Age theme. So gentlemen had to wear white tie and tails. I rented one. I'm sure I was the only one who had rented white tie and tails there, but I got into the Carlisle easily because, again, I'm now older and it's pretty easy. And that was a fun party. And I ran into several people there and danced the night away. So highly recommend the after parties. I did a Gucci party one year, Versace party one year, both tough. The Versace party you'll like, because as I got rebuffed one time, I got there too early. The gala hadn't even ended, and I wasn't dressed appropriately. And the second time I made my move, and it was Blake Lively had a dress with all these women have. It's a question of who's got the longest train. Well, she had a very long train, and there's some guy right when I was standing there bends over to pick up the train, and I didn't even think about it. I just bent over in unison with him. I got the one side of the train, he got the other, and in we went into the Mark Hotel, where I'd been turned away an hour earlier, and into the party. So you got to be quick on your feet. And I think the whole gay thing and all the stories I had to come up with really has been a huge help to my crashing abilities.
I absolutely love it. I recommend people get this book highly. Like I said, I have mine. I just ordered it from Amazon the other day. It should be here tomorrow, I think. But before we wrap things up here, talk about any tips that you might have. Give a couple of tips. I'm sure there's quite a few in the book, but give 1 or 2 good tips. One of the things I read, which I really like, is your 3 hey rule. I think that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah. So, you do get stopped if you're in without a ticket or a credential quite often. And usually security, they're doing their job. They're trying to do that. So, if you get in and they think you just slip past them, they'll go, hey, excuse me. And so the first time, never look around, which is what amateurs do because they're feeling guilty anyway. So you don't, you don't want to push it too far, but the second hey, ignore that. And then the third hey, you look around like, are you talking to me? That usually works. If you get past the 2 heys, you're in. But if it's a third hey, my advice, and others try different approaches, but is always to play dumb, be as nice as possible, never indignant. Again, these security people are doing their job, and usually the nice approach works. But you need a story, you need something, and I pride myself, and that's what's really interesting in this book. I never do the same thing twice. I always try and come up with something different, particularly for these major crashes. And that's the creativity part. And all those stories are in World's Greatest Crasher.
Guys, you got to get this book. It's amazing. Now, you're from Chicago, you live in LA, But you started this book tour in Australia. Tell me about that. What made that your destination of choice to start with? And I know you were there the last weekend of World Pride. Was there any party crashing there?
Um, yeah, well, I had decided, a good friend, said, we need to take a trip together. I'm going to World Pride in February. Why don't you meet me there? I was like, done, in Sydney. And so off I went. And I decided, though, that the month of March 2023 was the 50th anniversary of my big Oscar crash, standing behind Liza Minnelli and all the Oscar winners on stage, which really pissed off the Academy. And I promised never to do that again. But I wanted to commemorate that with the launch of the book, do it in Australia because I was going to be there anyway. And so I decided to make it a global book tour. And then I went on a show that they had interviewed me on. It's called the Today Show, coincidentally, but it's on it's a national show, just like the Today Show here. And they had interviewed me remotely, just like we're doing, and intimated, when the book's done, come back. It was right at the start of the pandemic, and I was writing it. So I sent the producer an email and said, I'm going to be in Sydney. Love to come. March 1st. They wanted me the first thing. So it was it's on our website, World's Greatest Crasher. It's a 5.5-minute interview, and they're so excited about these crashes. It's very funny. And it was number one. Then I had a little film crew with me that day that I found on the street. I've been very legitimate, but they were covering Pride. And so they spent the whole day with me. So they filmed me at the show. They went, we did bookstore crashing, most of which I'd kind of prearranged at the bookshop Darlinghurst, which is the #1 LGBTQ bookstore, where I actually had a calendar in many years ago. They put the book out on display. They now rep the book and have it. And I went to Dymocks, the biggest bookstore and most prestigious. Met with the general manager, had books there. And so it was a whole afternoon of crashing bookstores, events. There were 12 gay guys having a caftan party at a restaurant. They said, what's this? Who's this guy? And then they asked me to come over and speak to their luncheon. And so it's just a crazy afternoon. So we're going to have that video done, hopefully very soon, that I will put on my website, of kind of the day of the global launch of World's Greatest Crasher, crashing a lot of events. And I did do a lot of crashing in Sydney. It's actually very, very easy there because everyone in Australia is so nice. And again, I look like I belong. I said on that show, the older you get, the easier it is. So I did manage to get into a lot of events, and also had a lot of tickets because it was a pretty amazing time to be at World Pride with tens of thousands of people from all over the globe. I'm in a unique situation here where I'm able to get some attention on this because it's kind of an entertaining story, but I still don't have a real publisher. And I've tried that. I've tried an agent. I, of course, had a lot of motivation issues as a result of the pandemic. I'm still kind of digging my way out of those. So I'm using this to try and get my mental health back on track, and also looking for a real publisher who can get this in a lot of eyes and in the schools, because not just the crashing, that's kind of weave throughout the whole publication, but it really talks about my struggle growing up, the double life, my activism, and a lot of much more substantive things than crashing a party or something, but a lot of the significant things I've done, and a lot of the efforts I've done to try and learn from my life of living a double life for so long. So I try and let other people know that it is not necessary, and that things are getting better. And so there's a lot of silver linings in this book that I hope will get a lot of eyeballs.
Well, congratulations. I'm so excited for you. I mean, this is your second memoir. You had Who's Fred, who kind of talked about little generalities. And then did I see something about Undaunted? Is that still on the timetable? You working on that one?
That's in the works. Yeah. So the first book, Fred Who, was co-written by Steve Pfeiffer, who is a very well-regarded, well-known author. He's written Morris D's 2 books with him, who's head of the Southern Poverty Law Center. He wrote James Baker III's memoir with him. I grew up with Steve, knew me very well. So he wrote Fred Who, and then he also agreed, after a lot of arm twisting, to write Undaunted, which is in draft form, which is the story of my historic campaign. And it became, of course, a lot more relevant thanks to Pete Buttigieg, who took my little campaign, which had been long forgotten, and elevated me, because I legitimately am the first openly gay major party candidate. There was one in 1982, a little ahead of me, who ran in the Socialist Party, but made between Democrat and Republican, I was the very first. Pete was always very gracious, always acknowledged that fact, thanked me for being a trailblazer. I ran him in D.C. not that long ago, twice, and he's still so grateful. And it's a little emotional, actually. I have a great picture. I saw him during the correspondence dinner last spring, and which I'd crashed, of course, and he was, got a little teary-eyed when he ran into me at one of the brunches there. So there's a definite connection. We're the only two who've ever done it in a major party, and I sit here today, so I'm not standing, but I predict that he will be our next president following Joe Biden. And so we're very excited to have him in there. I mean, we need some youth and vigor, and guy is so smart and such a great conciliator. He's going to make one hell of a president, and wait till the world gets to meet Chasten and the twins. And it's the kind of thing we've all been doing and fighting for is it's on the verge of happening. Openly gay president.
Right. I got to interview him when he was running back then, and we had a fantastic talk, and we've kept in touch on a couple of emails since then, but just the real deal. So I'm really excited to see his progression, and I do hope he becomes the next president after Biden. That would be amazing.
It's going to happen.
Well, Fred, thanks so much for taking the time. Give everyone again the name of the book and your two websites they can find you at, and we will go ahead and get people to come out there and get this book, guys. It's on Amazon now.
It's probably backwards, but it says World's Greatest Crasher. And as I mentioned, it's just replete with, so what I did, a lot of photos in the middle of the book, but I put 20 pages, I made little composites of all the different, like here I am at the Met Gala that was for 2017. Running into, all kinds of people. But I put all the different events. I crashed the White House. So I have everything documented. So any skeptics out there that think I'm making half of this stuff up or any of it, I have proof. So I hope people read this book and spread the word. Thank you so much for having me on your show again. It's always a pleasure. Someday do it in person.
Definitely. Hopefully when I come out there this summer, we'll see it in person. Fred, stay on the line for me. Thanks again so much, guys. We've been talking to Fred Karger. Be sure to get this book. And we'll be back in just a couple of seconds. You're listening to the Left of Str8 Show right here on the Left of Str8 Radio Network.
Thanks for listening to the Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website, www.leftofstraightradio.com, for contests and other news and information. See you next week.